this final in the summer series on the heart of God. The key word is endurance. James chapter 5, verse 11 is only one of three references to Job outside of the book of Job, which is quite shocking when you contemplate it. The other two are in Ezekiel in the 14th chapter, where it is simply said twice that even if Noah, Abraham, and Job were residents of the city, God would not save it simply because of their righteousness. James chapter 5, verse 11 says, "Be patient, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider blessed those who have endured." You have heard of the endurance of Job. Some of your translations say you've heard of the steadfastness of Job. Others say you've heard of the patience of Job. You've heard of the perseverance of Job. And you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. He was blameless, upright, God-fearing, evil-shunning, Bill Gates rich, a major employer, diversified investor, proud family man, faithful husband, spiritually sensitive, morally upright, incredibly generous, compassionate and caring, a defender of justice, responsive to the inequities of the world around him, and a frequently sought out counselor. Job was a man that had it all. Turn in your Bible or turn on your Bible to Job chapter 1, verse 1. There was a man of the land of Uz, which is just on the southeast side of the Sea of Galilee, whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Now there were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 5,000 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. So that this man was the greatest of all of the people of the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them. He would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. 7 sons, 3 daughters, and 1 wife. He was a man of moral integrity. He was a family man in spite of the fact that he had his plate full with business. 7,000 sheep were for the purpose of both food and fleecing. He would make a profit by selling them as food. He would also make a profit by having them sheared. Took a lot of hired help to do that. He had 3,000 camels. Camels were like a Crete transport of Lincoln. They were interstate transportation. They were used for hauling goods from one nation to the other. He had this massive interstate transportation operation. 500 teams of oxen, which means he had 1,000 trained ox to pull, which meant that he was cultivating unbelievable amounts of land, an agricultural developer, to say the least. And on top of that, he had 500 female donkeys, and you read that and go, who cares? Well, the donkey was just kind of like the Lincoln Continental or the Cadillac Escalade, or perhaps it was, as I would prefer, a Porsche kind of SUV. It was the choice ride for royalty. He was a supplier of the finest rides for all of those who were well connected. And on top of all of that, while he had all of that to distract him, he was deeply concerned for the spiritual condition of his family. Whenever his children, which they did regularly, apparently at Dad's bank account, would gather together for parties and celebration house to house, Job was always concerned for their spiritual condition. And Job understood, even though Job is a real man in real time that probably appeared in history somewhere before Abraham, he already understood that every sin, whether it's a sin of omission, which means I didn't know that was a sin and I did it, or a sin of commission, which is I knew what I was supposed to do and I didn't do it, whatever it was, he understood that a blood sacrifice was necessary to cover the offense. And he was so concerned that he actually became, as it were, a priest for his own family. He was concerned that they would have sinned against God and that it needed a covering. He was, as it says, he was the greatest man of the East in his day. And he did this continually. And suddenly, he lost it all. Now, the next 39 chapters of the book of Job struggle with the question that is universal and has transcended all time. And it's this question: why do bad things happen to good people? For the next 39 chapters, the hinge or the pivot in this massive book. I don't know that I've ever read a book so many times before I preached on it than I did Job. I so appreciate Austin and Brett giving me the opportunity to spend 35 minutes on 42 chapters. But the first two chapters set the tone, and the last chapter answers the question. But you cannot appreciate either end of this thing unless you take time at least to scan through the middle 39. He lost it all. Asking the question, why does bad things happen to good people? Some of you are asking that question for yourself or for friends of yours. These seem of all the people that should face such affliction and such a trial. I'm not that individual, or I've only done one thing wrong in my whole life, or my friends, they just seem like the most upright, the kindest, the most gracious people. Why is it that difficult times come to their life? Follow along on your screen. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and here's an unnerving statement: and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "I have come from going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it." According to 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, he has been like a roaring lion seeking those that he might devour. Satan said, have you, or then he said, God said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" That phrase is used 5 times in the book. God always calls Job his servant. "That there is none like him on the earth, a blameless, upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." And then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? Have you not blessed the work of his hands? His possessions have increased in the land. But if you stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, he will curse you in your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day when the sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there was a messenger to Job, and he said, "The oxen were plowing, and the donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you." And while he was yet speaking, another came, and he said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." And while he was yet speaking, there came another. And he said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 groups. They made a raid on the camels. They took them. They struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. They hijacked all of your shipments, and I alone have escaped to tell you." And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, "Your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you." And then Job arose. He tore his robe, he shaved his head, he fell on the ground, and he worshiped. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And in all of this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. I wish I could say in my own life when difficult times have come that I bit my tongue and I restrained my voice and I did not question or challenge the sovereignty of God. But I have to confess it's not true. In all of this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. So chapter 2. Now again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And shockingly, Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. I think it's helpful to know that Satan does not have autonomous authority. He cannot run around and do whatever he pleases. But he, like the other angels, are under the authority of God. God holds him accountable. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" And Satan answered and said, "From going to and fro throughout the earth, walking up and down, seeking those, of course, that I may devour." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason." Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin. All that the man has he will give for his own life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand. Only spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. And then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." Now, before we go further, let's say a word in defense of Mrs. Job. She too had gone to the cemetery to bury 10 children from her own womb. She too had grieved the death of their hired staff, their laborers, and their servants. She too had gone from riches to rags. Her husband was so overwhelmed with his own situation, with his own health needs, that he was not there to comfort her. His arms could not hold her. He was trying to simply physically survive. I believe that Mrs. Job cried out in love and concern and said, "How can you go on any longer? If all it takes to end it is to curse God, then for heaven's sake, stop thinking about me. Curse God and get it over with." But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" Here it is again. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Oh, he doesn't stay on that pinnacle of piety. The weight, the sagging weight of his suffering ultimately gets to him. But what the adversary uses to bring him down are three supposed friends. Verse 11. Now when Job's three friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place. Eliphaz, the Temanite, came just from a little bit east of where Job lived. Bildad, the Shuhite, came all the way from over by the Chaldeans, right up next to Arabia. And Zophar, the Naamite, came all the way from Arabia. Job had friends internationally, and they went out of their way. They stopped whatever it was they were doing. They came because their friend was in desperate need. They made an appointment together to come and show him sympathy and to comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and they wept. They tore their robes. They sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. They sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. The greatest gift that his friends could bring him was their presence and their silence. You know how that is. When you go up to somebody that's in the midst of a terrible, painful situation, and you want to say that word or that phrase that makes it all better, and when it's about halfway out of your mouth, you realize how stupid and insensitive it sounds. When my daughter died 14 years ago, we had to create what we call the fictitious stupid comment book. Some family members actually have a whole chapter dedicated to them. His friends loved him well when they loved him in silence. But the sagging weight of his suffering overwhelmed Job. So now we're just going to do a blitz fly over the middle chapters of the book. It tells us in chapter 3 that Job said, "Let the day perish on which I was born. Why did I not die at birth and come out of the womb and expire?" Chapter 6, verse 8, "Oh, that I might have my request, that God would fulfill my hope, that it would please God to crush me, that he would let loose his hand and cut me off." He had Elijah syndrome. Chapter 7, verse 16, "I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Leave me alone, for my days are but a breath." Chapter 10, verse 18, "Why did you bring me out of the womb? Would that I had died before any eye had seen me, and as though I had not been carried from the womb to the grave." And now the trial of three friends. Eliphaz, chapters 4 and 5, brings an indictment against Job on the basis of experience. They see Job's agony, they hear his expression of frustration and his proclamation of his innocence, and suddenly they consider it their responsibility to answer the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Eliphaz's assumption is chapter 4, verse 7. "Remember who that was innocent that ever perished? Or where were the upright ever cut off? As I have seen, experience, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same." Job, innocent people don't suffer. Chapter 5, verse 17, "Now a word was brought to me stealthily. My ear received the whisper of it amid thoughts from visions of the night." I have a word from God for you, Job. "It came to me in a secret vision. When deep sleep falls on men, dread came upon me and trembling, which made all of my bones shake. A spirit glided past my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. A form was before my eyes. There was silence. And then I heard a voice. Can mortal man be right in the sight of God? Can a man be pure before his Maker? Behold, blessed is the one whom God reproves. Therefore, despise not the discipline of the Almighty." Job, God is spanking you. Take it, thank him for it, and he'll bless you. And then Bildad. He indicts him on the basis of conventional wisdom. Does God pervert, chapter 8, verse 3, does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert the right? If your children have sinned against him, he has delivered them into the hand of their transgression. You want to know why your 10 children died? Because they sinned in their hearts against God. Chapter 8, verse 8. "Inquire, please, by bygone ages, and consider what the fathers have searched out. For we are but of yesterday and know nothing. For our days are earth of a shadow. Will they not teach you and tell you and utter words out of their understanding?" Doesn't tradition tell you, Job, that these things don't happen to good people? Chapter 8, verse 20, "Behold, God will not reject a blameless man, nor take the hand of evildoers." And then Zophar, chapter 11. Zophar says in verse 4, "You say, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in God's eyes. You profess to be innocent." Chapter 11, verse 6, "Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves." Oh, thank you for that. Just give me a paper cut. Pour some lemon juice in it or something. Chapter 11, verse 11, "For he knows worthless men. When he sees iniquity, will he not consider it? But a stupid man will get understanding when a wild donkey's colt is born of a man." On the day the donkeys fly, then a stupid man will understand. Job, what's wrong with you? How much more does God have to do before he gets your attention? The corporate conclusion from three close friends is simply this. Job, you're guilty of some secret sin. Confess it, and God will restore his blessing. Here's Job's response. Chapter 9, verse 14. How can I answer God, choosing my words with him? Though I am in the right, I cannot answer him. I must appeal for mercy to my accuser. Chapter 9, verse 20. Though I am in the right, my own mouth would condemn me. Though I am blameless, he would prove me perverse. I am blameless. I regard not myself. I loathe my life. Chapter 12, verse 4. I have understanding as well as you. I'm not inferior to you. Who does not know these things? I'm a laughing stock to my friends. I who called to God and he answered me, a just and a blameless man, have become a laughing stock. Chapter 13, verse 2. What you know, I also know. I'm not inferior to you, but I would speak to the Almighty. I desire to argue my case with God. Be careful what you ask for. God will often give it to you. Chapter 16, verse 2, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforts are you all. Chapter 19, verse 2, how long will you torment me and break me to pieces with your words? But his friends aren't done. The heat rises, the conflict intensifies, and Eliphaz comes back for round 2. Chapter 15, should a wise man answer with windy knowledge and fill his belly with the east wind? Should he argue in an unprofitable talk or in words with which he can do no good? Job, shouldn't you just shut up? Bildad, chapter 18. How long will you hunt for words? Consider and then we will speak. Why are we counted like cattle? Why are we stupid in your sight? Zophar, chapter 20. Do you not know from this and from of old, since man was placed on the earth, that the exalting of the wicked is short and the joy of the godless is but for the moment? Job, don't you understand? You had it for a moment, but you're an ungodly man. Therefore, God wouldn't let you keep it. Chapter 20, verse 29. This is the wicked man's portion from God, the heritage decreed for him by God. Job responds in chapter 21. How then will you comfort me with empty nothings? There is nothing left of your answers but falsehood. That should have been the end of the debate, but they go around 3. Eliphaz chapter 22. Is not your evil abundant? There is not an end to your iniquities. Agree with God and be at peace. Thereby good will come to you. If you return to the Almighty, you'll be built up. If you remove injustice from your tent. And then Bildad jumps in again, chapter 25. How can a man be right before God? How can he who is born of a woman consider himself to be pure? Job's response, chapter 27. Far be it from me to say that you are right. Until I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. I've examined my own heart. I've examined my conscience. It does not convict me. And then what you have in chapters 29 and 30 is Job's litany of the way things were and how they are today. In chapter 29, he says, oh, that it was in the months of old as in the days when God watched over me. When I was in my prime, verse 4, when the friendship of God was upon my tent. Verse 5, when the Almighty was yet with me, when my children were all around me, when my steps were washed with butter and the rock poured out for me streams of oil. I went out of the gate of the city. I prepared my seat in the square. The young men saw me. They withdrew. The aged rose. They respected me. The princes refrained from talking. They laid their hands on their mouth. Verse 30, or chapter 30. But now they laugh at me, men who are younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to set with the dogs of my flock. So 3 men have accused Job of sin. He has not listened, chapter 32, verse 1. So these 3 men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Arrive a young man by the name of Elihu. His name simply means he of God. Chapter 32, verse 2. And Elihu burned with anger at Job because he justified himself rather than God. Did Job sin? Only one sin that's recorded in the scripture, and that is he spent his life in self-defense of his own righteousness, when in reality his response to all of the challenges should have been the defense of the living God. He also burned in anger against Job's three friends because they found no answer. Although they had declared Job to be in the wrong, they accused him of something. They couldn't come up with an illustration of what it was. Chapter 33, verse 9, you say, I am pure, I am without transgression, I am clean, there's no iniquity in me. Chapter 34, verse 5, but Job has said, I am right, and God has taken away my right. In spite of my right, I am counted as a liar. My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. Chapter 34, verse 11, far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should do wrong. For according to the work of a man he will repay him, and according to his ways he will make it befall him. Of a truth, God will not do wickedly, and the Almighty will not pervert justice. Chapter 34, verse 26. Would that Job were tried to the end, because he answers like a wicked man. And the final punch, chapter 37, verse 23. The Almighty, we cannot find him. He is great in power, justice, and abundant righteousness he will not violate. Therefore, men fear him. He does not regard any who are wise in their own conceit. I give up, Job. I've given you my best argument. I've got nothing more that I can say. The aged had no wisdom. I have come to you as the representative of God. You continue to argue your own righteousness, your own innocence. I give up. And at that moment, chapter 38, God steps in. Chapter 38, verse 1. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? I love this. Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Job, you asked for an audience with God. Man up. Here's your opportunity. And then as you read down through chapter 38, and the only reason that I am flying over it quickly is I hope that I'm only whetting your appetite to actually want to read the book of Job and to try to understand it for yourself. God asked him this whole series of questions. Others were giving him accusations and answers. God gives him no answers. He just raises the bar and said, who is this that darkens counsel? Where were you? Have you commanded? Have you entered? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Have you entered? Who has cleft a channel for the torrents of the rain? Can you bind? Can you lead? Do you know? Can you lift? Can you send? Can you hunt? Do you know? Do you observe? Can you number? Who has let? To whom have I given? Can you bind? Do you give? Do you make? Is it by your understanding? Is it by your command? And finally, chapter 40, verse 1. Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer. My wife is a master at crafting a question rather than giving a statement or an answer. God silences Job, not with what he says, but by what he asks. Chapter 40, verse 3, Job said, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer to you? I put my hand on my mouth. I spoke once, I will not answer. Twice, I will not proceed any further. It's basically Job crying, uncle, I give up. You're right. I'm wrong. You win. God's not done. Chapter 40, verse 7. He says it again. Dress for action like a man. Man up. Will you even put me in the wrong? Job, will you condemn me in order that you might appear right? Do you have an arm like God? Can you thunder with a voice like his? And then he asked him another series of questions. Can you? Can you? Can you? And then finally, Job's response. brings us to the scripture reading of the morning. Verse 2, chapter 42. I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things that are too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you make it known to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore, in spite of that, I despise myself, and I repent in dust and ashes. And with the transformation of heart, the response of the Lord is this. And the Lord had spoken these words to Job. He said to Eliphaz the Temite, my anger burns against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me that which is right, as my servant Job has. Now therefore take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves. Job begins the book by offering up sacrifices to cover the offenses of his children. The book ends with Job offering up sacrifices on behalf of the men who sinned against him to cover their offenses before the Lord. And my servant Job will pray for you, for I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly. When Jesus said, love your enemies, that's a hard thing to do. Can you imagine after days and days of verbal battle and misunderstanding and false accusations that God asked his friends to bring their sacrifices? Do you have any idea what kind of labor is involved in slaughtering 7 bulls and laying them on the altar? And to slaughter 7 rams with a bone knife and lay it on the altar? The blood that covered the offenses of his friends dripped fresh from the hands of Job. Every sin, whether of omission or commission, requires a blood sacrifice. But then on top of that, my servant Job will pray for you. I will accept his prayer. I will not deal with you according to your folly, for you have not spoken to me that which is right, as my servant Job has. So Eliphaz the Temite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamite went and did as the Lord had told them. And the Lord accepted Job's prayer. Verse 10. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends. And the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then came all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before, and they ate bread with him in his house. And you're reading that and you're going, well, where have they been all this time? Where's the family when a family member goes through a crisis? They showed him sympathy and comforted him from all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. Each of them gave him a piece of money and a ring of gold. He's bankrupt. He's broke. They start to rebuild his wealth, and the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels. His trucking firm doubled in size. He had 1,000 yoke of oxen. His agricultural development doubled in size. He had 1,000 female donkeys. His lease program for rides doubled in size. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. In all the land, there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters. Their father gave them an inheritance among their brothers. After this, Job lived 140 years. He saw his sons' sons, 4 generations. And Job died an old man full of days. Job's response, I know that you can do all things, that no purpose of yours will be thwarted. 3 things arrive from that. Number 1, they were sacrifices of atonement, not gifts of appeasement brought to Job. They didn't just need to make things right with Job, because every sin is first and foremost not against another, but it is against the Lord. Second, God gave him the comfort of his family. And last of all, he gave him the restoration of blessing, which brings us full circle to this 42-chapter book. We began by asking the question, why do bad things happen to good people? But we end it by asking the question, why do bad things happen to godly people? You see, God never told Job about the cosmic conflict that put the laser on his soul. We knew about it from chapter 1. Job never understood. He never knew. He was never given divine insight. Let me give you 5 quick takeaways from the story of Job. Number 1, every circumstance of our life, God is keenly aware and intimately involved. Number 2, a life that is built on things we can lose is a life with no endurance. Number 3, the greatest possession we will ever treasure is God himself. Number 4, the secret to life is loving him for who he is, not for what he gives. Number 5, no matter how long or how short our lives may be, for those who are trusting in him, there is the promise of a forever reunion. Endurance, that supernatural grace that enables steadfastness of soul, even when one's journey leads through the darkest valley. This is a masterpiece of poetry and prose. Dr. John Piper has rewritten it in a poetry called The Misery of Job and the Mercy of God. He concludes it in this way: behold the mercy of our King, who takes from death its bitter sting, and by his blood and often ours brings triumph out of hostile powers, and paints with crimson earth and soul until the bloody work is whole. What we have lost, God will restore, that and himself forevermore. When he is finished with his art, the quiet worship of our heart, when God creates a humble hush and makes Leviathan his brush, it won't be long before the rod becomes the tender kiss of God. God doubled everything Job had except his children. And why is that? Because you can't replace a child. You can have another one, but you can't replace one. Job had 10 children to live out the last 140 years. He doubled the lifespan of a man, and he gave him 10 children to live it out with him. But while he was doing that, there was in heaven 10 children cheering him on. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despised the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. The Lord doubled all Job's former possessions, but he only added 10 children to his family. Job had 10 children share the next 140 years of his journey, but he had 10 children in that great cloud of witnesses. As Job struggled to hold on to his faith, they stood and cheered him on. Dad, don't give up. Dad, don't give in. Dad, don't throw in the towel. There is the joy of a forever reunion waiting. Don't give up. Don't give in. Hold on to Jesus. Job never saw why he suffered, but he saw God, and that was enough. Endurance is that supernatural grace that enables steadfastness of soul even when one's journey leads through the darkest of valleys. Lord, that message is for my own soul and for the soul of someone else. As we have flown through rapidly this great narrative of your amazing sustaining grace. You have allowed the Spirit of God to speak to the hearts that need to hear. I thank you that you are a God that controls things, that children of Job saw from the eternal perspective the work that you were doing, and from there they could bless it, even though Job and the rest on earth wondered, why is it that God's people suffer evil in this world? But you're still God, you're still on the throne. Your purposes will not be thwarted. And though we do not understand, we trust in you and we rest in you.